Hello everybody and welcome back to another product review. So today we're talking Secret Weapon and their new line of weathering paints. So I picked these up. They were on pre-release. You can get them now from Secret Weapon's website as well. I'm not sure if they've really filtered out to a lot of other stores, but they are available there. And there's a really interesting range of paints, and I was really excited to get my hands on them, to use them some. I've been using them now for a couple weeks since I got back from Adepticon. And I thought, hey, let's get a review up because I think they're pretty cool and useful. So there's kind of a spoiler. So there's several different ranges to this. I don't have the whole range here. This is just a small sample of it. There's a whole rusting line. There's a very dark. Then there's old rust. This one's brown rust, and then there's a very light rust. Most of these are 3 or 4 color sets. You've got a tire line, which starts with the actual tire itself, which has a satin sheen to it. Then it goes up to the rubber, which is sort of a gray black, and then the rubber highlight. There's also an orange and yellow rust in there to kind of highlight everything, as well as a whole wood set, which includes dark wood, handle wood, weathered wood, which looks very gray for doing old woods. You could also use it as your very upper highlight on your tires and stuff like that. And then finally there's an entire dirt cycle starting with old mud, which has kind of a ruddy red tone, cake dirt, and light dust. Okay, so that's kind of the whole deal. If you get it from Secret Weapon, they're $4 a piece. These come in 20 milliliter bottles, which I think is pretty reasonably priced. I mean, it's pretty standard. They're good dropper bottles. They don't tend to clog. Look at that there. Comes right out. Maybe a little too much because I shook it a little too hard. That's my fault, not the paint's fault. But they're very interesting paints because they don't all have a universal texture, and you can do very complex effects with unusual things. So for doing that caked on dirt type of look onto stuff. So they dry in a very fascinating sort of way, and I'm going to actually start painting with this as we talk, just as I continue with the review. So I'm just going to put a little bit of the old rust, which is sort of the very dark ruddy brown, out there. There is a darker color, and I'm going to grab some of the brown rust. We want to use some of both of these. Okay, and so what's interesting about them, and we're just going to use, you can see here we've got our old friend the Juggernaut. He's just completely metal, so we're just going to rust him out, and we're going to do that by just kind of stippling some of this on. We're going to see how this goes and how it looks when it's all applied and dries and stuff like that. So you can see that has a very red tone to it, right? I don't know if that really comes through on the camera, but I can tell you, in reality, that is a very, very red tone to that rust. We're just going to shove it down here in the cracks and stuff of this guy. So, as I said, there's a whole big range of it. The trick with them is that they do apply, they have some different textures. So as I mentioned before, when you talk about something like the base tire rubber, that one has a nice satin finish to it, a little bit of sheen, like tires, basically, right? Whereas when you go up into the rubber and the very highlight rubber, what you get is something more like dust. Okay, so it looks more like the chalky darkness of, the chalky grayness, that's what I would say, of your tires as they drive down the road and accumulate, concrete dust and just everything else that's there. So I think a lot of these are great, especially for you 40K players out there, anybody doing large vehicles. But they're also interesting in that, so there you can see I just kind of threw some of that around as shadow. Let's rinse that off. I'm going to let that kind of dry, and then I'm going to just grab some of the other rust color. These are also interesting to work in with your other paints, just because although some of them have a texture, the ones that don't are very matte, and the way that they apply can can really make it a sort of interesting painting experience to just kind of use them. You can see how these are applying. Let's really take a look here, right? Like when I put this on, you can see how that looks. And it stays fairly wet. Like I didn't do anything. This is straight out of the pot, right? It stays fairly wet. So I can really push that around, right? I can really take those weathering effects and kind of scoot them, draw them down into the cracks, you know, whatever I want to do, which is nice. The blacks and such has a similar effect. So I'm going to flip that over. And I'm just going to put some of the black here on this side. It's tire rubber, but that's okay. We'll use it as though we were shadowing this guy, just so you can see kind of how that looks if we were going to have the dark effect on there. Because I really like these rubber colors mixed into other paints. And again, they have this very sort of, they have a very matte quality to them. They're really these hyper matte colors because they're all meant to be for weathering. And so as a result, when you mix them in with other paints, when you thin other things out, you don't get any, you know, any glossiness or anything like that. Okay? So you can see there, that's a, you know, you can create really nice shadow effects with these because of the way that they're very matte. They just kind of feather out really nicely, right? And actually, I've liked using them for that purpose. I'm actually been using them just as much to kind of create, to mix in with other paints or just to help with some light shadows, some dark shadows, stuff like that. So flipping this back around over here, which should be dry now, you can see, I hope, let's really try to zoom in here. I'll see how much I can do this without, and then clear that up. Oh, come on. You can do it. Sorry, I'm trying to get really, really tight. There we go. Perfect. Now stay. Okay. I'm going to try my best not to move too much. But you can see the texture of that. So if you look at the metallic paint, and then you look here, right? You see how dry that texture is? How rough and sort of beaten that looks, right? I really like that texture that it adds. If I flip it around here, sorry, you can see how that's dried with those two layers of rust and the difference in the colors. Okay? Let's flip it around and we'll take a close look at the gray, because it dries in a similar fashion. Again, come on, you can do it. Find your focus. There we go. So I really love this for, there we go. I really love this effect on metals. You can see how it interacted with that metal to just create a nice dull, like a dullness to it, right? So if you want kind of an old, beaten look to your steel, I think this takes your normal color, and you can see how it darkened it down, it dulled it out. It didn't really blacken it, right? One of my problems with using something like a Nuln Oil or something is you're automatically blackening that steel, when that's not necessarily what I want. Sometimes I just want the metal to look old, right? Weathered, like it doesn't, nobody walked up to it and polished it in a couple months. And to me, that's a great effect. You can see there when I turn in the light, the difference of how it reflects the light. So I really love these rubber paints for that. So that's rubber and rubber highlight. They just, the way you can push them around and feather them and work them into other paints, I think it has a really fantastic, you can use it as sort of your shade color to darken something down. You can also use it as an interesting extra effect on your metal to create, you know, sort of aging and wear. Okay, so there you go. All in all, I really like these new paints. I think they're pretty great. Let me zoom back out here so I'm not constantly tripping you up on focus. I really like these new paints. I think they're pretty great. They're very easy to work with. I think they're fairly cost effective, pretty standard at $4 for a 20 milliliter. I think they have a lot of uses both in weathering and in just mixing in with other paints, though you do have to be careful. You can't use like these rust things mixed into something you want to be like cloth or smooth, because it will have a rough texture to it. So it's great if you're trying to do something appropriately textured. You mix this into, a color you're doing for fur or hair or something like that. Oh, it's beautiful. It mats it right out, and it gives it that sort of rough texture that fur or hair would normally have. So I really like that. Like a leather, this stuff is just bonkers awesome for doing leather. Actually, the whole range. So I do really love that if you're trying to do like a really dark, rough, natural leather. All in all, I think these paints are worth picking up if you're into doing weathering and stuff like that, because they also then have other uses. You can use them in your normal painting routine. I would say if you're not doing anything that's weathering, then probably a little lower on the priority, just because there's probably other things you can get. But if you're going to be doing a lot of vehicle work, if you're going to be doing any kind of like big mechs or dirty armies or anything like that, I think these are aces, because not only are they going to excel at that, but they're going to then work into the rest of your rotation in some interesting ways. So overall, I give these Secret Weapon Weathering a solid A-. I think they're a good value. I think they're very useful for what they're doing, understanding that the only caveat to that A- is that, you have to be actually doing weathering to recognize their full value, or doing rubber tires or caked on dirt or stuff like that. If your current project is a bunch of shiny bright high elves that just brought their armor out of the smith, well, maybe give these a pass for now. But if you're trying to capture some old beaten nerdolite force, oh, give these a second look. Let me tell you what, I think you're going to have some fun with that. So there you go, A- overall. Hope you enjoy the review. As always, appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.